The night was thick with an ominous silence, broken only by the sound of frantic footsteps racing down the hospital corridor. Beneath the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of Memorial Cross Hospital, a 12-year-old boy, blind since the age of 7, clung to his dog's harness, the only lifeline he had left. His pulse pounded in his ears, the panic thick in his throat as his mother lay unconscious, her shallow breathing a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "Help! Please! Somebody help my mom!" Liam's voice cracked as it echoed through the empty halls. His loyal German shepherd, Scout, guided him with unwavering precision, pulling him toward the emergency room. The dog's fur was matted with mud, remnants of their desperate dash through the park shortcuts. Every step felt like an eternity, but they couldn't stop. His mother, Sarah, had collapsed. Everything had gone wrong, and there was no one to turn to but the dog by his side. Scout knew what to do. Scout always knew. "Over here!" a nurse shouted, her voice sharp with urgency as she rushed toward them. "What happened, sweetheart?" Liam's fingers gripped Scout's harness tightly, his knuckles white as his voice trembled with panic. "We were walking home. Mom said she felt dizzy. Then she just fell. Scout led us here. Please help her." The medical team swarmed Sarah's still form, their voices a blur of technical commands. But Scout stood firmly by Liam's side, his brown eyes never leaving his young companion. He was the rock, the steady presence Liam needed as his world crumbled. Behind them, watching from the entrance, stood Richard Thompson, the neighbor who had always seen Scout as nothing more than a menace. He had fought for months to have the dog removed from the neighborhood, convinced that Liam was too blind to care for an animal, let alone a service dog. But now, as the scene unfolded before him, he couldn't ignore the truth staring him in the face. This dog, this so-called menace, was guiding Liam through the most terrifying moment of his life. As the stretcher was rolled past them, Liam's voice broke through the chaos, his words a desperate whisper, "Stay with me, buddy." Scout pressed closer, offering a silent promise of protection as they followed the medical team inside. Welcome to HeartForce, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you're listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. Liam had once been full of life, a boy who could name every color in his mother's garden. From the deep crimson of the roses to the delicate lavender of the morning glories. He had painted the world with his imagination, filling the small town of Meadow Ridge with hues of joy and adventure. That was before darkness fell, before bacterial meningitis took the light from his eyes, leaving only a hollow emptiness where once vibrant colors had been. It was supposed to have been just another illness, another cold that would pass. But this time it didn't. Sarah watched helplessly as her son fought for his life in the pediatric intensive care unit. For 2 weeks, Liam lay motionless, trapped in a world that only he could understand. And when he finally opened his eyes, he was in a world he couldn't see. "Mommy, when will the lights come back on?" he asked, his voice small and full of confusion. Sarah's heart shattered, and the weight of the answer pressed down on her, a burden she couldn't share. "The lights won't come back, sweetheart. Not in the way you remember them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The tears she fought to hold back, making their presence known. Liam's world had turned to darkness, and Sarah had to find a way to make this new world livable for him. She poured herself into creating a home that would allow him to navigate this silent, colorless life. She worked double shifts at the diner, saving every penny she could. She remodeled their home, adding braille labels, tactile markers, and guide ropes so that every inch of their home could be a map Liam could read with his fingers. But the community's reaction was a different story. Some, like the elderly Mrs. Martinez, offered casseroles, kindness, and help. But others, like Richard Thompson, saw Liam's condition as a blemish, a mark on the neighborhood that needed to be erased. He made it clear that he didn't want a blind child, and certainly not a blind child with a service dog, living in his neighborhood. "I can't handle this," Richard had muttered under his breath as he observed the modifications Sarah made to their yard, the guide ropes, and tactile markers designed to help Liam navigate. This neighborhood is falling apart because of you. Richard's words stung, but Sarah refused to let them take root. She focused on the love she had for Liam and the deep strength he displayed every single day as he navigated his world of darkness. He had learned to adapt, his other senses sharpening. He could recognize people by their footsteps, smell flowers by their scent, and hear sounds that most people would never notice. But the loneliness was becoming unbearable. His classmates avoided him, unsure of how to interact with him. And as the birthday parties dwindled, Sarah knew her son was aching for something more. One evening, as Sarah worked late, she returned home to find Liam sitting alone on the front porch, his fingers tracing patterns in the wooden railing. He tilted his head slightly, listening to the distant sounds of children playing in the street. A longing, too painful to put into words, hung heavy in the air. "Mom," Liam said quietly, "can I go outside with my white cane? I want to try walking down the street again." She hesitated. The world outside was no longer the friendly place it once had been. But her son's determination was too strong to deny. "Okay, sweetheart, I'll come with you." And so, they stood together in the darkened night, Liam holding his cane while Sarah walked beside him, ready to guide him through whatever obstacles lay ahead. The autumn night had settled in, the crisp air filled with the scent of rain and fallen leaves. It was the kind of evening that reminded Sarah of the simpler times, before life had become a series of challenges, before Liam's sight had been stolen from him, before the weight of single motherhood had fallen squarely on her shoulders. But now, as she hurried home from Murphy's diner, the rain-soaked streets reflected the grim reality of her life. She reached for her umbrella, but the wind tore it from her grip. Rain poured down relentlessly, drenching her hair and clothes as she guided Liam down the street, his hand gripping hers tightly. His white cane tapped rhythmically against the wet pavement, the only sound that anchored them in the overwhelming silence of the night. "Mom, wait," Liam said suddenly, halting in his tracks, his head tilted to the side, as if listening to something that Sarah couldn't hear. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, scanning the alleyways for any sign of danger. "There's someone crying." His voice was soft, but there was a sense of urgency in it. Sarah hesitated. They were soaked, tired, and the alley between the houses wasn't a place she wanted to linger. But Liam's concern for the sound of distress tugged at her heart, and she couldn't ignore it. "Okay, we'll check it out, but stay close to me." They turned down the alley, the faint sound of whimpering growing louder with each step. As they approached the corner of the alley, they found the source, a small, trembling puppy, no more than a few months old, huddled in a cardboard box, shivering from the cold and fear. Liam's breath hitched in surprise. "What's that, Mom?" "It's a puppy," Sarah said softly, crouching down to inspect the animal. Its ribs were visible through its matted fur, and it looked up at her with big, sorrowful eyes. Without a word, Sarah reached out and gently stroked the puppy's head, her heart aching for the small creature. Liam lowered himself to the ground, his fingers outstretched. "Can I touch him?" Sarah nodded, guiding his hand carefully. As soon as Liam's fingers brushed the puppy's fur, something remarkable happened. The puppy's tail gave a weak wag, its body seeming to relax under the gentle touch. Liam gasped, a smile tugging at his lips. "He's so cold, Mom. We can't leave him here. He'll die." Sarah's heart twisted. She knew what she should do, call animal control, take the puppy to the vet. But as she watched Liam, his face alight with a rare, joyful smile, she knew there was only one thing she could do. "We'll take him home, just for tonight," Sarah said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do." The puppy didn't resist as Sarah wrapped it in her scarf, cradling it against her chest. The warmth from the puppy seemed to seep into her own bones, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. Liam insisted on carrying their new guest, with Scout's harness still in his hand. He cradled the puppy close to him, his fingers trembling with excitement and awe. Sarah guided them both home, her thoughts racing. What would Richard Thompson say when he saw them with this stray animal? What would the neighbors think? just as they reached their front yard. The unmistakable voice of Richard Thompson cut through the rain. "Mrs. Anderson, what are you bringing into the neighborhood now?" Sarah froze. Her hand instinctively tightened around Liam's. But it was Liam who responded, his voice steady and full of conviction. "We found a puppy, Mr. Thompson," Liam said, his words cutting through the tension. He was dying in the rain. Richard's face contorted with disapproval. "That's precisely my concern. You can't just bring stray animals into a residential area. There are rules." Liam didn't falter. He needed help. "Mom always says we should help those who need it." For a brief moment, Richard's stern expression faltered, a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, crossing his face. But it passed quickly, replaced by his usual cold demeanor. "I'll be watching," he warned, retreating into his house. Sarah felt a pang of frustration, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the small victory that had just occurred. They had saved this puppy. They had given him a chance. As they entered their home, Scout followed close behind, his brown eyes gleaming with something like understanding. The puppy curled up on the rug, exhausted, and for the first time in a long time, there was peace in the Anderson household. Sarah looked down at Liam, who was already talking to the puppy softly, his fingers gently exploring its fur. "What should we name him?" Liam asked, his voice filled with wonder. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "We'll figure that out tomorrow," she replied softly. "But for tonight, let's just call him Scout." The moment she said the name, the puppy's tail wagged again, as if in approval. Scout it was. The next few days were a whirlwind of decisions, each one leading Sarah and Liam deeper into a new reality they hadn't anticipated. The puppy they had rescued, Scout, seemed to fit into their lives seamlessly. Despite his frail appearance, he had a spirit that matched Liam's resilience. Every morning, as Liam held onto his harness, Scout guided him through the house with remarkable precision, his steps steady and sure. But the world outside their door was a different story, one full of judgment, skepticism, and challenge. Richard Thompson, as expected, was relentless in his pursuit to remove Scout from the neighborhood. His complaints escalated from concerns over the dog's presence to more personal attacks on Sarah. "She's just using that dog to make her life easier," he would mutter to anyone who would listen. "What happens when that boy gets hurt? When Scout can't keep him safe?" But it wasn't just Richard. The whispers began to spread, as if the sight of a blind boy and his dog was too much for some people to accept. A neighbor named Mrs. Peterson, who had once offered Sarah a casserole during Liam's darkest days, now crossed the street whenever they walked by. "It's irresponsible," she would say, her voice full of concern as she stood in the driveway. "What if he pulls him into traffic? What if that dog snaps?" Sarah tried not to let the words reach her, but each complaint, each disapproving look took its toll. She had already fought so many battles for Liam, fought for his education, fought for his right to simply exist without being judged, and now she was fighting for Scout too. The community she had once called home was turning its back on them, and she couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could hold on. But it wasn't just the outside world that was weighing them down. As Scout grew stronger, so did Liam's connection to him. He needed this dog. He needed Scout not just to guide him, but to be his companion, his friend, the only being who truly understood him in this dark world. He wasn't just Liam's eyes. He was his heart, his protector, and the boy was learning to love him in ways that words couldn't express. One afternoon, as Sarah worked a double shift at the diner, Liam and Scout practiced in the backyard. The progress was slow, but it was steady. Liam's confidence was growing. He was moving with more assurance, his fingers finding their way through the commands he had memorized. But even as Liam's bond with Scout deepened, Sarah couldn't escape the mounting pressure. The financial strain, the mounting complaints, the constant uncertainty, it all weighed on her. It wasn't until the first snowfall of the season that things took a turn. The town of Meadow Ridge was blanketed in white, the crisp air laced with the scent of fresh snow. It was the kind of weather that brought warmth to people's hearts, but for Sarah, it brought a chill she couldn't shake. The heating system had been on the brink of failure for weeks, and now it was completely gone. They huddled in blankets, waiting for a repairman who might never come. Sarah felt the burden of it all in a way she never had before. She could handle the financial struggles, the judgment from neighbors, the loneliness. But the thought of her son being cold in their own home, of Scout, who had already given so much, going without, was too much to bear. That night, after another long shift, Sarah found herself standing in the doorway of Liam's room, watching him sleep. Scout was curled up at the foot of the bed, his eyes half closed in contentment, a quiet sentry at the door of Liam's dreams. She thought back to the day they had found him, how his tail had wagged weakly as Liam had first touched him. He had been a lost, abandoned creature, as forgotten as Liam had once felt. But now, they had found each other, and there was no turning back. The next morning, Sarah received a call from Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the veterinarian who had been caring for Scout since his rescue. The news wasn't good. Scout was suffering from severe malnutrition and needed immediate care, a care that came with a price tag far beyond what Sarah could afford. "That's another $400, Sarah," Dr. Hayes said gently. "He's still a puppy. He needs his vaccinations, deworming, and antibiotics. We can start treatment immediately, but it's not going to be cheap." Sarah's heart sank. She didn't have $400. She barely had enough for food that week. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the phone, trying to figure out how she could make it work. "I'll do what I can," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just need him to be okay. Please do whatever it takes." As she hung up the phone, Sarah felt the crushing weight of her choices. She could work more hours, sell more of the family's few remaining heirlooms, but it didn't seem like it would ever be enough. And still, the thought of losing Scout, the dog who had brought so much light into Liam's world, felt like it would destroy everything they had fought for. But there was a glimmer of hope, a spark of change that came from the unlikeliest of places. Officer Michael Martinez, a local police officer who had always kept an eye on Liam and Sarah, stepped forward. He had seen how far Scout had come, and he saw the toll it was taking on Sarah. "I'll take care of it," Officer Martinez said quietly. "I've got a fund at the station for situations like this. We'll cover the medical costs. Don't worry about it." Sarah didn't know whether to cry or laugh, but the relief was overwhelming. The weight she had carried for so long seemed to lift. If only for a moment. Maybe, just maybe, things were beginning to change. The world had always been a little quieter for Liam, ever since the darkness fell. But as the days passed, the silence of his world grew softer, less intimidating, as he found comfort in the unwavering presence of Scout. The bond between them, once tentative and fragile, had solidified into something unbreakable, a testament to the strength of their partnership. But with every moment of progress, there was still the looming shadow of the world around them, the doubts of neighbors, the rising tensions, and the ever-constant pressure to prove themselves. The storm had been fierce that night, the kind that rattled windows and howled through the trees. Yet inside the Anderson home, there was a calm that had nothing to do with the weather. It was in the way Liam had moved from room to room, his confidence growing each day. It was in the way Scout guided him through every obstacle, his movements more fluid, his understanding deeper. But the world outside their door still saw them as a threat, as a potential disaster waiting to happen. At the town council meeting, the battle over Scout's future came to a head. Richard Thompson had mobilized every ally he had, pushing his proposal to have stricter regulations on service dogs, especially those in training. His argument was simple. There was too much risk involved in having an untrained dog in a residential area. But Sarah Anderson, though weary, wasn't backing down. She wasn't just fighting for Scout. She was fighting for her son, for the future they had built together. Liam, though still only 12, stood at her side, ready to face the crowd. His voice, once quiet and uncertain, was now firm and strong. "I don't need to see to know that Scout is the best thing that ever happened to me," he said, his words clear and steady. "He's not just my dog. He's my friend, my protector, my partner. And I trust him more than anyone, more than I trust myself." The room fell silent. Sarah could feel the eyes of the council members on her son, the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. But Liam didn't waver. He spoke about the countless moments of breakthrough, about the joy Scout had brought into his life when the darkness seemed too much to bear. He spoke of the connection they shared, one that transcended blindness, transcended limitations. As the council members debated, Sarah felt the sting of every word. Richard Thompson's arguments were forceful, full of statistics and concerns about public safety. But as the minutes ticked by, something remarkable happened. The crowd began to shift. Slowly, subtly, the tide turned. People who had once stood on the side of caution were beginning to question the truth of Richard's words. Eleanor Thompson, Richard's wife, who had always kept her distance, stood up at the back of the room. Her hands trembled as she spoke, but her voice was steady. "I've been watching Liam and Scout," she said quietly. "I've seen the change in that boy. He's not the same boy he was before. And Scout? Scout isn't just a dog. He's a lifeline. I've watched them work together, and it's something extraordinary. It's not about rules or regulations. It's about what's right." Her words cut through the room like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah saw a flicker of hope, a shift, a crack in the armor of opposition. The vote was taken, and in the end, it was the community, Liam's community, that spoke for him. The council's proposal was defeated. The town would not force Scout to leave. The rules would be adjusted to allow for compassion, for flexibility, for the human element that had been so sorely lacking in the debate. Sarah sat back in her chair, tears of relief welling up in her eyes. The weight of the past months, the battles, the isolation, the fear of losing it all seemed to melt away. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to breathe. But as the room cleared, she looked over at Liam, who stood with Scout by his side, his hand on the dog's harness. The confidence radiating from him was undeniable. Scout had not only guided him through the obstacles of the physical world, he had helped Liam find his place in a world that had once seemed so overwhelming, so isolating. "I told you we'd make it," Liam whispered to Scout, his voice full of conviction. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Yes, you did," she said softly. And as she watched her son and his dog, she knew that no matter what came next, no matter the challenges ahead, they would face it together. Scout wasn't just a service dog. He was a symbol of resilience, of the power of partnership, and the strength of a bond that had defied the odds. In that moment, Sarah realized something profound. Her son had found his way out of the darkness, not just with Scout's help, but because of it. Together, they were unstoppable. Liam and Scout's journey teaches us that no obstacle is too great when we have the support of those who truly care for us. It is through companionship, trust, and resilience that we find the strength to face even the toughest challenges. This story reminds us that the most profound changes often come when we least expect them, and that compassion and love can change a community. What do you think about Liam and Scout's story? Share your thoughts below and tell us about your experiences with dogs and their impact on your life. Don't forget to subscribe to HeartForce for more inspirational stories that remind us of the strength we can find through love and companionship.